02:41 hours, northern outskirts of Tehran. The radar screens were clean, not quiet, not degraded, clean. Across 3 separate air defense sectors, operators watched layered tracking displays showing commercial traffic corridors, civilian airliners, and routine military patrol patterns. Nothing anomalous, nothing inbound, nothing threatening. And then the first building went dark. No warning tone, no incoming missile alert, no airspace violation, just a hardened military facility losing power in the middle of the night. Inside a fortified compound linked to Iran's integrated air defense command structure, backup generators kicked in automatically. Floodlights flickered, secure communication lines rerouted. At first, it looked like a systems fault, but within 90 seconds, 2 additional installations, connected through encrypted fiber links, experienced simultaneous signal failure. 3 nodes, same time. No kinetic impact detected. That was the moment commanders realized something far more dangerous than a missile strike had just happened. Because missiles can be tracked. This could not. For years, Tehran invested heavily in what it called its multi-layered shield, long-range S-300 and domestically produced Bavar 373 systems positioned in overlapping arcs. Mobile radar platforms. Underground command bunkers reinforced against bunker busters. Fiber-linked coordination centers built specifically to survive electronic warfare. The doctrine was simple. No aircraft could approach undetected. No cruise missile could penetrate untracked. No strike package could operate near the capital without being challenged. On paper, the shield was dense. In practice, it was predictable. And predictability is the first weakness of any defense network. Rewind 72 hours. Routine maritime operations were underway in the Arabian Sea. The Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group maintained a steady tempo. Surface vessels rotated patrol geometry through established corridors. Electronic surveillance aircraft maintained standoff distance from Iranian airspace. Nothing escalatory, nothing abnormal. But 900 miles from Tehran, something subtle shifted. An E-18G Growler altered its orbit pattern by 11 nautical miles. An E-2D Hawkeye adjusted altitude by 4,000 feet. A destroyer operating Aegis baseline software initiated what logs would later classify as signal calibration testing. To outside observers, it looked procedural. It wasn't, because modern air defense systems don't just watch the sky. They emit, they transmit, they synchronize, and in doing so, they expose rhythm. Iran's strongest defensive advantage wasn't hardware, it was confidence. Confidence that its radar arrays were synchronized. Confidence that overlapping coverage eliminated blind sectors. Confidence that its hardened infrastructure near Tehran was immune to surprise. But confidence is built on assumptions, and assumptions can be studied. For months, U.S. electronic intelligence platforms had been cataloging Iranian emission patterns, radar rotation intervals, frequency shifts, signal strength fluctuations during maintenance cycles, even the microsecond delay between sector handoffs inside Tehran's integrated defense grid. Every system has a heartbeat. The key is learning when it skips. 01:58 hours. A scheduled recalibration window began in Sector Bravo, Northwest Defensive Arc. Routine maintenance, 8 minutes long. Backup arrays covering partial load. Nothing unusual, except it overlapped, by coincidence, with a secondary system's sync adjustment in Sector Delta. 2 minor recalibrations, harmless individually. Together, they created a corridor only 40 seconds wide. But 40 seconds in electronic warfare is an eternity. At 02:39 hours, something entered Iranian airspace. It did not appear on conventional radar. It did not emit traditional propulsion signatures. It did not resemble a cruise missile profile. Because it wasn't traveling horizontally, it was descending from altitude. Small, low cross-section, released far beyond traditional intercept radius. By the time Tehran's layered systems resynchronized, the objects were already below primary detection threshold and aimed precisely at the connective tissue of Iran's defense network. 02:41 hours. Impact. Not explosive in the cinematic sense. Contained. Directed. The first strike targeted a relay structure above a subterranean coordination bunker. Penetration. Internal detonation. power routing disrupted without leveling the compound. The second targeted a secondary data hub responsible for cross-sector targeting confirmation. The third impacted a communications conduit facility linking two radar arcs. 3 points: minimal blast radius, maximum dislocation. The result wasn't dramatic fireballs visible across the skyline. It was silence, digital silence. When the shield's outer layer attempted to re-establish full integration, it found that confirmation loops weren't responding. Targeting data couldn't cross sectors. Engagement authorization chains froze in mid-sequence. Backup circuits activated, but discovered physical routing damage that prevented synchronization. The shield wasn't destroyed. It was disconnected. Inside Tehran's primary air defense command bunker, operators attempted to diagnose the anomaly. They searched for cyber intrusion. None detected. They searched for inbound aircraft. None present. They checked satellite feeds. No obvious strike signatures. The problem wasn't visibility. The problem was geometry. To strike those three nodes with that timing required precise mapping of internal infrastructure and recalibration cycles, which meant one of two things. Either the defense grid had been penetrated electronically for months, or it had been studied externally with frightening precision. Both possibilities were unacceptable. By 0310 hours, Iranian command had isolated the affected sectors and shifted to decentralized targeting protocols. Manual verification processes reintroduced. The shield functioned again, but slower, less confident, and critically, with awareness that it had been breached without conventional confrontation. No aircraft were intercepted. No dogfight occurred. No cruise missile salvo lit up radar scopes. Yet Tehran's strongest shield had been pierced, not destroyed, exposed. Across the region, U.S. assets maintained silence. No press release, no statement, no overt claim of responsibility. Because the message didn't require one, this wasn't about immediate escalation, it was about calibration. If escalation continued in other theaters, Red Sea shipping, proxy drone launches, regional missile transfers, then the layer protecting Tehran itself was not invulnerable. The demonstration was measured, but unmistakable. What shocked commanders most wasn't the precision, it was the restraint. The strike package, whoever executed it, clearly had the capacity to escalate further. The chosen targets were surgical, strategic, limited, which meant this was signaling, not annihilation, and signaling changes posture more effectively than destruction. By dawn, Tehran's skyline looked unchanged. Traffic resumed. Morning broadcasts aired routine programming, but inside hardened bunkers beneath the capital, engineers were rewriting assumptions, because layered defense works only if layers overlap, and that night, for 40 seconds, they didn't. By 0530 hours, damage assessment teams had confirmed what operators already feared. The three impacted nodes were not random facilities, they were connective architecture, relay infrastructure, signal arbitration hubs, confirmation gates. The strike had not targeted launchers. It had not targeted missile batteries. It had targeted trust. In an integrated air defense system, trust is everything. One radar detects, another confirms, a third authorizes. If confirmation loops fracture, engagement timelines stretch, and stretched timelines invite penetration. The question inside Tehran was no longer what was hit, it was how were we mapped, because mapping requires patience, and patience requires observation. For months, Iranian defense sectors had operated on predictable maintenance cycles, recalibration windows scheduled during low-traffic air corridors, sector overlaps timed to avoid redundancy spikes, backup arrays activated in known intervals. Each of those adjustments was small, routine, harmless in isolation, but collectively they formed rhythm, and rhythm can be modeled. Electronic surveillance platforms don't need to breach networks to understand them. They listen, they measure emission strength, they calculate latency between handoffs, they identify micro gaps during recalibration, and eventually, those gaps become coordinates. Satellite imagery later reviewed by Western analysts would show nothing extraordinary in the hours before the strike. No visible aircraft penetration, no large formation staging, no high-profile kinetic buildup, but maritime logs reveal something subtle. 2 U.S. destroyers adjusted station keeping in the Gulf of Oman roughly 4 hours before impact. not aggressively, just enough to optimize line of sight for long-range precision support. At the same time, a high-altitude ISR platform maintained a standoff orbit beyond Iranian airspace but within monitoring range. This was not a sudden act, it was a prepared geometry. Because geometry wins modern warfare, not volume. The objects that descended into Tehran's shield did not resemble traditional cruise missiles. They were too small, too high release, too low emission. Released beyond conventional detection arcs and gliding into critical points through calculated timing windows. Precision munitions do not require spectacle, they require coordinates. And someone had coordinates down to the meter. What Tehran had built was formidable. Layered radar, mobile launchers, hardened bunkers, redundant fiber lines. But redundancy assumes external attack pressure. It does not assume internal dislocation. And that is where the shield was exposed, not destroyed. Exposed. Because now, commanders knew something they didn't before. Their grid could be studied, their timing could be predicted, their recalibration windows were not invisible. In the hours following the strike, immediate changes were ordered, maintenance cycles randomized, sector recalibrations staggered unpredictably, manual confirmation loops reinforced, mobile radar units repositioned closer to urban arcs. The shield became denser, but also slower, and that trade-off matters, because speed in air defense determines intercept viability. Slower confirmation chains mean extended exposure windows, which means deterrence calculus shifts. The psychological impact extended beyond hardware. If Tehran's strongest shield could be threaded without overt confrontation, then future escalation scenarios carried new uncertainty. Would missile transfers invite deeper penetration? Would proxy drone waves trigger additional demonstrations? Would nuclear infrastructure remain untouchable? Strategic messaging doesn't require speeches, it requires clarity. And clarity was achieved at 02:41 hours. Western officials said nothing publicly. Privately, diplomatic channels carried a restrained tone. No triumph, no escalation language, just an implicit understanding. Escalation pathways exist in both directions. The demonstration had not targeted civilian areas, it had not leveled urban blocks. It had not inflicted mass casualties. It had pierced architecture. That distinction was deliberate, because deterrence works best when proportional. Inside the Irgi command structure, debates intensified. Hardliners argued the strike proved external aggression required symmetrical retaliation. Pragmatists argued escalation could invite deeper structural exposure. The shield had not collapsed, but its invulnerability myth had. And myths are powerful strategic assets. Once they fracture, doctrine must adapt. Over the next week, satellite analysts observed subtle Iranian adjustments. Mobile batteries rotated closer to core districts. Additional decoy emitters deployed in peripheral zones. Fiber conduits reinforced. Redundant microwave relays installed. The shield grew more complex. But complexity increases surface area. And surface area increases monitoring opportunity. The real consequence wasn't technical, it was conceptual. For years, Tehran operated under layered confidence, layered missile deterrence, layered air defense, layered proxy pressure. Now one layer had been shown to contain timing vulnerabilities, and once vulnerability is acknowledged internally, posture changes. Commanders become cautious, authorization chains tighten, reaction times stretch. And stretched reaction time shifts initiative to the observing side. No fighter jets were shot down, no missile exchange occurred, no public military confrontation erupted. Yet Tehran's strongest shield had been breached without spectacle. That is what made it powerful. Because spectacle invites retaliation. Precision invites recalibration. Modern warfare is less about overwhelming force, more about informational dominance. Who understands the grid better? Who predicts rhythm better? Who times movement within recalibration windows better? The strike near Tehran demonstrated something subtle but strategic. Defense density does not equal defense unpredictability, and predictability is the currency adversaries trade in. In strategic terms, missile balance remained unchanged, force posture across the region remained intact, carrier groups continued patrol cycles, Iranian batteries continued rotating. But confidence shifted slightly. And small shifts in confidence can influence large decisions later. Escalation becomes riskier when shield reliability is questioned. Restraint becomes more appealing when demonstration proves capability. At sunrise, Tehran's skyline appeared unchanged. Morning traffic resumed. News broadcasts framed the incident as technical malfunction. Official silence from external actors reinforced ambiguity. But inside hardened bunkers, engineers were rewriting timing protocols. And rewriting timing protocols is admission, not of defeat, but of exposure. The lesson was not that Iran's defense collapsed. It didn't. The lesson was that even layered systems have synchronization moments, and synchronization moments can be mapped. For 40 seconds, the layers did not overlap. For 40 seconds, geometry aligned against confidence. And in modern conflict, 40 seconds is enough. If escalation resumes elsewhere, Red Sea, proxy fronts, missile corridors, the memory of 0241 will remain embedded in decision-making rooms, because deterrence isn't always built on destruction. Sometimes it's built on demonstration. The shield remains, the systems are active, the radars spin. But now Tehran knows something it didn't before. The strongest defense isn't the one with the most hardware. It's the one with the least predictable rhythm. And that night, rhythm was studied, mapped, and briefly broken. The question isn't whether Tehran can rebuild synchronization. It can. The question is whether it can restore the certainty that it once operated under. Because certainty drives posture. Doubt introduces caution. And caution shifts strategic tempo. Iran's defense wasn't erased. It was exposed. And exposure, in contested regions, is often more consequential than destruction. If this was calibration, what happens if escalation continues? If this was restraint, what does escalation look like? And if geometry wins wars, who currently understands the grid better? Drop your analysis. Because the next shift won't announce itself with explosions. It will arrive quietly, in the timing.